man, I'm on the fence about the, help me out, with like the Palmers versus you on the.
Obviously, if it's the Palmers versus me, I'm on my side.
No, I mean, I get
You're talking about the issue.
No, I'm talking about the issue though, as far as no fault divorce. That's what I'm getting at.
So, actually, I thought I was gonna have a slot to speak here on that issue, but I don't think that's gonna happen. So, my feeling about no fault divorce is this: in 70-75% of the instances, one parent does not want the divorce. And usually, the children don't want the divorce.
Right.
So you get one individual who says, I want to get a divorce for whatever reason, or for no reason whatsoever. Maybe it's a guy who said, hey, you know, this attractive little chick over here is 20 years younger than my wife, and she really fulfills me. Or maybe it's a woman who says, hey, this guy over here, he's got more money than my husband. He takes me out places. So they will say, I want a divorce, and they call it irreconcilable differences.
Right.
Number one, if you are the defendant or the respondent to that lawsuit, because divorce is a lawsuit,
yes.
Do you ever win?
No.
You never win. So, what about due process protections of our Constitution? I mean, we have the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and it guarantees us due process protection. Nobody shall lose life, liberty, or property without due process.
Right.
And yet, in the case of divorce, you will lose 50% of your assets. And you could say, well, they're shared assets. Well, there's a lot of those things that are dependent, but you can lose access to your children. You know, you had an intact family, you lose the family. You had a marriage, you lose the marriage. And, you know, this idea about irreconcilable differences, what does that mean? Nobody even knows. There's 50 different laws in 50 different states, and they each have a different interpretation. How do you defend yourself? By the way, Brandon, I now accuse you guilty of blah. You're like, well, what is blah? It doesn't make a difference, you're guilty.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you get one person who makes an allegation, which is accepted as truth. It's hearsay to begin with. There are no witnesses involved. And all that matters to the judges is the paperwork in order. Did you wait the 60 days? Were you properly served? Is the paperwork in order? That's it.
Absolutely.
It's an administrative thing. So and you look at two individuals. I would say this: if you have two individuals, a husband and a wife, no children, and they say, hey, it's not working for us, we want to get a divorce, it's a mutual thing. Whether that's good or bad, they should have that ability to do so, that right to do so. Under our Constitution, neither one of them are having due process taken away from them. They've said, it's a mutual thing, we're going to split. If you have children involved, I want to know where are the due process protections for the children. The children want husband and want mother and father both. They don't want mommy half the time and daddy half the time, or mommy 80% and daddy every so often, or vice versa. They want both parents there. Where are their protections? Why does nobody advocate on behalf of the children? We think it's a parental issue, but it's really a whole family issue. So divorce is not just dividing up two people, it's dividing up families. And divorce creates victims. In no-fault divorce, one person gets to choose to victimize an entire family in many instances. The issue of people have said here, and some people in this movement have said, well, the children are resilient. They're going to come back. But that's just not true. They have study after study. There was a book that was written recently by Layla Miller. It's called Primal Loss. And in this book, she talks about adult children of divorce. She just put out some questions, had 70 participants, and these are people that said we were never able to talk about this because they're in the position between both parents, sometimes having to almost be a parent to the parent that they're living with. I mean, and they said we have had no voice. You want to know what it really feels like? And this is talking about people 20, 30 years later, and it's still devastating to them. And, you know, I have a quote. Do you mind? Why don't you hold this for a minute? Well, I'll pull it out here.
Okay.
So, it's interesting because the words associated with divorce, children are resilient, and here are the words that they use to describe divorce. They talked about loss, devastation, turmoil, sadness, crisis, major upheaval. It led to antisocial behavior, trauma, destabilization, heartbreak, crying, loss of income, loss of home, loss of family, loss of faith, struggle, loneliness, I'm scarred for life, resentment, pain, hopelessness, depression. These are words that children are using when divorce takes place, when they lose a father or a mother or the family gets split. And I know that there are people here that say we have a constitutional right to divorce. There is no constitutional right to divorce. And what the Palmers are arguing is that the First Amendment gives the freedom of association, which therefore means I can disassociate from anybody wherever I want to. Marriage is different. Marriage, in most instances, is a covenant entered by two people before God in the presence of many witnesses. It's also a promise of the state. We are going to be married. This is the environment you bring children into. The marital family, the home is for the children. And when you tear that apart, you have a whole bunch of crises and other events that happen in our society. One man, Benjamin Scafidi, wrote a study done in 2008, and he said that the cost of unwed childbearing and divorce to taxpayers is $112 billion a year. But the thing is, you're not being told that. Every time somebody divorces, guess who gets the bill, Brandon? You get your part of it, I get my part of it, everybody here gets their part of it. But you know, we're not talking about that because nobody's disclosing that fact. Unwell childbearing, the same thing. Divorce leads to a whole host of problems with children. I mean, if you look at children from divorced families, they're more at risk to enter into jail, they're more at risk to become addicted to alcohol or drugs, they're more at risk to go into sexual promiscuity, they're more at risk not to finish high school, they're more at risk to be caught in a cycle of poverty. If you look at something even as severe as child trafficking, they're more at risk for that. Every single malady that you look at from a social level increases for children of divorce. But it's our constitutional right to divorce. And that's what Ron and Sherry Palmer are arguing. And I'm saying no. But the other thing is that the issue is no-fault divorce. When one person gets to make an allegation and you can't defend against it. You're guilty. You're 100% guilty. But to go back to, so what I'm going to call Ron and Sherry's position, Ron and Sherry and the people that believe the position, that's fantasy land divorce. Let's talk about real world, what happens with the separation of families and the destruction of families. Divorce is not just between two people, it's fracturing families. Strong families are the basis of a strong country, a strong society. You destroy the family, how do you have such things as limited government? You can't have it because you're destroying the very entity in which these things, freedom, responsibility, love, forgiveness, how to cope with conflict and varying viewpoints, that's being destroyed. You're having somebody who can abandon you at will, and you're saying, well, we're raising all these kids and they don't have any commitment. Well, parents, you copped out on your marriage. You abandoned your kids, you abandoned your spouse, and I'm not saying in every instance that it's unjustified, but I'm just saying, there's got to be some type of protections in here. Here's what one person said, we'll catch up with you. Here's what one person said, can parents change their behavior? If this guy's out there having an affair, can he stop his affair? Damn right he can. If she's out there doing whatever, can she stop it and change her behavior? Yeah, she can, but she doesn't want to, or he doesn't want to, because it's my freedom to do so. Freedom does not mean freedom from consequences. It does not mean I can do anything I want to. Freedom does come with responsibility. But here is one thing that a child of divorce wrote, an adult child of divorce, and it just tears at my heart. It says, divorce creates its own language for a child. Much of it is unspoken, and the child is the only one who achieves fluency. It might be the voice of doubt in the back of my head one day, or it might be the voice of indecision where I should be resolute on another day. The perpetually dysfunctional language replaces the language of family love that otherwise forms a child's internal dialogue. So in a way, divorce becomes the everlasting gift to a child that child cannot overcome. The dysfunction replaces the permanence and security of an intact family. Imagine a family as an airplane in flight. You can do many things on a plane, including arguing, and still get to your destination safe and intact. But divorce is a parent opening the emergency exit mid-flight, depressuring the entire cabin, and jumping out while pulling the ripcord on a parachute designed only for him or for her, and yelling, "You'll be fine!" A child can't make sense out of why the parent did this. They are merely left with a crisis on a broken plane without a way to navigate well or land safely and intact. The broken family is a reminder that a parent had a choice. The child does not have a choice, though this is the perpetual source of confusion, pain, and complication where peace, love, joy, and simplicity should have been the norm. Last, but certainly not least, my adult eyes have seen how loving, compassionate, and supporting friends, and even strangers, are to their children, even now. Years after the divorce, even now, I wonder, why wasn't I special enough to elicit the same love, compassion, or support from my own parents? It's always a question the child asks himself, why wasn't I enough? And I'm sure you've heard about children that blame themselves, like, it must have been my fault somehow. Why couldn't they have stayed together, even just for me? It's more confusing as an adult, though, because I have the clarity that maturity and reason can bring. I can see clearly that nothing could justify doing what my parents did to me. Now, if Ron and Sherry Palmer want to defend that as a constitutional right, I will oppose them to the end. And no-fault divorce often allows this to take place in areas when it should never take place. So that's my position on it.